Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 3. I'm Sophia Robinson, and I'm a story listener, a writing coach, an editor, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative processes, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You could even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you're a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy, and today I have with me Olivia Gaines. So this was a real fun conversation I had with Olivia, who is an utterly prolific writer. Let me tell you a little bit about Olivia. So, Olivia is a USA Today best-selling, Emma Award, and multiple award-winning author who loves a good laugh coupled with some steam, mixed in with a man and a woman finding their way past the words of I love you. An author of contemporary romances, she writes heartwarming stories of blossoming relationships filled with heart and humor. The Technicians, the Blakemore Files, and the Modern Mail Order Brides are one-clicks for thousands of readers. When Olivia's not writing, she enjoys quilting, playing Scrabble online against other word lovers, and spending time with her family. She's an avid world traveler who writes many of the locations into her series. Most of the time, she can be found sitting quietly with a pen and paper, plotting more adventures in love. Olivia lives in Hephzibah, Georgia, with her husband, son, grandson, and snotty evil cat, Katness Evermean. Olivia and I talk about why she started writing romance novels and who she was inspired by, some of her characters in the book she writes about, the importance of writing a different narrative, how she gets her inspiration for her stories and her writing and world-building processes, how she does her research, advice she gives young authors through her mentorship, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome, Olivia. Thank you so much for joining me today. So happy to finally have done this.
All right.
After a couple of false starts, we were able to get it done. So I did your intro when I did the intro, so everybody knows who you are. I'm really excited to hear a bit more about you and your projects. Now, you are, I know, a multi award winning, have written quite a few books. I know that you write a lot of romance, which I can only say I've dabbled in writing a romance novel. I can't say I've reached the heights that you have. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into writing romance novels. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, usually when you start off writing romance, everybody starts off writing erotica. And I didn't want to be an erotica writer. I wanted to really dig into the women that I knew, the women that I had gone to college with, the women that were professionals, the women who were actually succeeding in love. And I wanted to write those joyous stories versus the story where we have so much trauma and we have to overcome all of these things, or the man has to ride in and rescue us. And some of my books, we ride in and we rescue them. A lot of my books, I think just about all of them, the women have their own money. And when the big billionaire romance craze came about, I was at a conference and I'm like, I wrote a billionaire romance too. Her name is Darlene, and I'm like, why can't we? Because we have women of color with money. There has always been women of color with money, even from Madam C.J. Walker and her daughter, inheriting all of that money. We've had our own. Why do we have to be the ones who are always being rescued? Why
Yeah.
do we have to be the ones who are always being strong? Um, Once you punch through that glass ceiling, you get there and you're there, and there is nothing compatible there for you.
Mm.
So I came up with a couple of series that I absolutely love. Um, I had a good friend that was writing mail order brides, and it was the traditional Western mail order brides. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna write me some mail order brides too. And her name gonna be Laquita from Compton, and she's gonna marry a dude that has a yurt that lives in the middle of nowhere that waters the vegetables from the water in the shower. And it started off tongue in cheek, and 15 books later, it keeps me fed because the stories are beautiful, they're powerful, they're joyful. Um, they're women who never thought that they would find the kind of love that they found, and they have.
Mm. And I listen. I love that so much. Partially because, and this is nothing to do with writing, but years ago, I worked with this. So my audience knows I'm from Barbados. Not
Okay.
there right now, but I was there up until a few months ago. And years ago, when I was a student, I worked with this professional. I will not say
Okay.
any more
Okay.
about him. I'm not trying to name and shame. That's not what's happening here. But I always remember him saying to me, men marry down, women marry up. So because I was on my road to being a professional, his thing was like, find a man now before you become professional, because it's like this upside down pyramid, and when you get to the top, there's not going to be anything up there for you. And I was just like, first of all, it was like, thanks for the unsolicited advice, no thanks. But also, right, but come on, right? But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
secondly, it made me kind of start looking around at the friends I had that
Choices.
were, yeah, in relationships, and I got really curious about the process. But I also think, you know that as much as art mirrors life, life can mirror art.
Yes.
And if you're not careful and you keep telling the same old stories, like, it's just gonna keep on happening in real life, you know what I mean? So I love that you are kind of like looking to tell different stories, because I feel like the more of those stories we have out there, the more likely real life is to mirror that. People
Right.
will. I feel like we learn so much from fiction. I love fiction. It's one of my favorite things to write and to read. So
But I also played around with reversing it. Okay. All
yeah.
right. I have a series, my technician series, where these men are hitmen. They are the guys who got out of the military with these skill sets that the government has found ways to
the,
reemploy.
the very particular set of skills.
Very particular set of skills. And I thought about John Wick at the Continental, and I'm like, okay, if he got out and got married, what about all these other people in the Continental with these skill sets? These
Hmm.
men that are broken, these men that believe they're not capable of having something good in their lives for somebody to love them. And I took these men and I paired them with these women that needed to be rescued, okay, and a child.
Mm.
Yeah, so you're talking about not only instant husband, but instant father. And
Mm.
yeah, and not only did I make them rise to the occasion, I also pointed out to them that yes, you've done some things that you wouldn't talk about over coffee,
Hmm.
but that does not mean you're not capable of being loved.
Yeah.
And these women, they love these men, you know. The last one here, Blind Spot, he finds out, now he's the only one of the 10 technicians that had a biological child. And he finds out that he has this child. and the mother has to go to work. And he has this child for 10 days. And so this guy who has had this job for 10 years, going to work every day, his coworkers don't know him. But through this child, he has blossomed, and so has the child, And the first night he's lying in bed realizing, oh my gosh, I'm somebody's daddy. And then the rest of the story is him stepping into that role, not only as Naomi's father, but he's thinking, when her mother comes back, she got away from me the first time. This time,
not getting away.
She's not getting away from me. And my daughter is going to grow up with me in this house,
Yeah.
And she's going to have her father read a story to her every night and kiss her goodnight, If not, I got plans where mama could be close by. But this is how it's going to be. And it's such a beautiful story, and readers are absolutely loving it because they're seeing this tough guy. Now, he does have to go to his second job during the story, but it's juxtaposition against him coming back reading, The Little Mermaid, But it shows that even though he has this stoic personality and this face that he doesn't really emote, on the inside, this child turns him to absolute wet spaghetti.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That is good. That sounds like a good story that everybody needs to go and get. So I'm encouraging everyone to do that now. I'm curious because earlier you talked about, this idea that they've always been women of color who've had money and, they've had love as well. And as I said to you, I've always loved people who write a different narrative for characters who are people of color, men, women, non-binary, whatever gender they want to be,
or color.
Why are those stories of changing that narrative, writing stories about women of color that have money, or that have love, or whatever the case may be? Why are those stories so important to you?
Those stories are important to me because we have been programmed to think that once you reach a certain level, you have to marry down.
Mm-hmm.
And
Stories I heard earlier.
Yeah, as we talked about that earlier, but what if you marry different? And even though you're programmed to think of it as down, it's not down. He has a different skill set. He has a different life skills than you do, which keeps it very, very interesting. I wrote one where the character had celiac disease, okay? And his entire life, he had this animosity or this animus in his family dynamic because mealtime was always such a problem because he couldn't eat what everybody else ate, And after a while, once he hit his teen years, he stopped coming to the table, which left his brother at the dinner table with the parents. So the parents focused everything on the brother. And so the brother, he and the brother had this horrible relationship. But then I bring in this beautiful queen who did the research as to what he could eat. Okay? So she has the table laid with food, and he's like, wow, this is beautiful, but I don't think I could eat any of that. She said, you can eat everything on this table. And he just stood there. He's like, what? Those cookies? That pasta? She's like, it's rice pasta. And he, what? And he's like, it's fried chicken. She said, yes, but I fried it in a different kind of like rice flour or something like that. And he's, oh, what? And even when his brother came for a visit, the brother is like, this is great, but he can't eat any of that. And he's like, I can eat everything on that table. And he has this whole different feel. And he was a postal worker. He ran a little bitty post office in this one horse town. But he had these tiny houses that he rented on these hiking trails. And she was this social media goddess, okay? And she came in and created this marketing plan for these little tiny houses on these hiking trails. And even though their skill sets and their life sets were so different, she left Atlanta and living in a mini mansion, to come live in a two-bedroom
I
cabin
know.
in Oregon in the woods. Did she marry down or did she marry her equal on a different level?
Yeah.
You know?
And I like that idea too, because I think this I'm not a fan of this whole down up concept, because I
Right,
feel like
right.
at the end of the day it's about what is important to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I do absolutely love hearing the different dynamics and stuff like that. We'll probably get back into that a bit later. I've
Okay.
asked you to bring a quote, which I think you did. I know you did because you sent it to me.
I
Tell
did.
me why. Tell me what it is and why it speaks to you.
The quote is, "You are the captain of your own happiness." Since the pandemic, we have seen a not only a cultural shift, but a shift in personal accountability. And I've been in some rooms with some people that they sit there coded in misery
Mm.
and toxicity. And they actually expect you to sit there and listen to them over and over and over again talk about the same problems and the same issues without giving any kind of answer or solution or tentative plan as to what they're planning to do to change the situation. You are the captain of your own happiness. If you want to wake up and be happy, wake up and be happy. You want to wake up and be miserable, then you continue to be miserable.
Mm.
But do not expect me to ride shotgun with you. I ain't
Nope.
doing it. I ain't
Is
doing
that,
it. I got other stuff to do, And don't get mad at me for being upbeat. I got enough stuff and enough baggage in my life that, sometimes I'll put some of it inside of a story, but I choose to be happy. And that's what I'm going to do.
yeah, and I love that. I always, you talk about putting some of that misery inside a story. I've had a blog for years, and when I started it, that was one of the things, because I was at work and there were days I would go into work that I would just be so irritated, and I
Yes.
would just tell myself, this is gonna make a really good blog post. And I just feel like sometimes that's the beauty of, like,
Yeah.
being a writer or being a creative. I know you like to quilt. I like I don't know how to quilt, but I crochet, I knit, I cross stitch, every, like, you name it.
Yeah.
And I did a cross stitch for a friend of mine that said, "Be nice to me, or I'll put you in my novel," or something like that. And
Kill you.
but listen though, like
Yeah.
I honestly feel like that was one of my secrets to, like, tapping back into my own happiness, is just feeling like, this is really irritating, but it's gonna make
Yeah.
such a good blog post. Like,
Yeah.
I can't wait. So I think sometimes that can be a bit of a, I like your quote of, like, you are the captain of your own happiness, but sometimes I feel like if we feel like we don't know how, I think sometimes the how is in the decision. First and foremost, it's in that decision, and then it's in kind of like the reframe, and then having a bit of creativity, right? Like, I feel like that never
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah.
That's,
And that's the thing. A lot of it is simply reframing.
mm,
Reframing your thought processes. Because if you had a trauma in your life when you were 12 and you're still processing that and now you're 40, might be time to kind of, I've done it this way for X number of years and it has not worked. What
mm,
if I wake up in the morning and instead of me sitting on the side of the bed, waiting for the coffee to percolate, what if I got up and start stretching? What if I got off the bed, got on the floor, and began meditating while I wait for the coffee? Instead of letting the coffee be the first thing to go into my body first thing in the morning, what if I put in 8 ounces of lemon water? You know,
mm,
you
right.
can make you can make small adjustments in your life and in your day that's going to over time impact how you feel about you and what you're doing. there are jobs that you can have for way too long, you know,
Mhm.
um, that it becomes this drudge in your life. And sometimes fear keeps us from moving on to something else. My generation, we were the ones that started, well, this job sucks. I'm going to go find another one,
Mhm.
versus the generation before us would stay in the job until they
Yep.
retired or
Forever
died.
until you retire. Yes.
or died. And my generation, we started, being a little bit more mobile. Okay, I've done this for 10 years. I can go do something else.
Yeah.
And then yeah, and the current generation, they're not going into the office at all.
Nope. Good luck with them. Like they're not.
I don't have a boss. I work for myself. I sit and I make videos all day on how to brush my hair. Those kind of things.
I feel like we could do with a bit of that. Well, personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but sometimes I want a bit of that. Um,
Yeah.
not even courage, but just that spirit.
Yeah.
Basically, I love that. Um, let's talk a little bit about your creative process because it sounds to me like you're pretty prolific, which I love. Um, so
I don't know about prolific. I know me and tequila gets along very well. And after a couple of margaritas, we can get really prolific.
whatever floats your boat, whatever helps you to write, but or to create. But like, what is your? Because obviously you've written multiple books,
Yes.
different topics as we talked about, different types of characters. So I'm
Mhm.
just curious. I know you said you talked a bit about like where you got your ideas from. Maybe it's from real life, maybe it's from something you watched on TV or whatever, and I love that. But what is your almost like not process, because obviously everybody will have a different process, or every book
Right.
will be a different process, but like, how do you do it? How do you sit and keep on writing? Like what's going in other than tequila?
What goes into, because people, I get messages from people like, you need to get out more, but then I don't want you to because I'm having so much fun reading these books. Or I have people who are going through personal traumas that they'll turn to my books because they know I'm going to take them on this emotional roller coaster, and they're going to laugh most of the way through the story. I start with, what if?
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that.
What if Sister Girl wakes up in Mexico handcuffed to a giant white man wearing a wedding ring and covered in some sticky? It became an international best-selling series called The Blakemore Files. And it was kind of like Mr. and Mrs. Smith tackle human trafficking.
Mm,
Um, but it had this cast of fantastic characters. A grandmother that made chili that tore everybody's stomach up. And toward the end of the series, it was a 10-book series. Toward the end of the series, they kind of weaponized the chili, giving it to people they didn't like and to their enemies. um, but I start with what if, and then I'm thinking, okay, is this one book and done? Is it a one and done? Or is it a 3-book series to where I'm going to give this character some real trials and tribulations and have them really grow into who they're going to be? Or is this a 10-book series where I'm going to introduce all these supporting characters and supporting cast? And once I determine that, I start building the world. I
mm,
start building this wonderful, wonderful world, where I don't have to reset it up for every single book. You know
mm.
the world. You
Yeah,
know the
well,
players. Yeah, you know the characters, or you know the town, because in the front of some of the books, I'll have a layout of the town. So you
mm,
know that if they're going down Dodger Lane, that they're going to pass by the courthouse and the cupcake shop. So all of those details are included, like maybe in the intro book, that have all of the details that may be a freebie for the reader to bring them into this world. And then I start building these characters with these great story arcs and making sure the character grows throughout the story, not only him, but also her. And on their path to the happily ever after, because that's the thing. In a romance, you want the happily ever after, versus
Absolutely.
in women's fiction where you got a happy for now, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's important when I do my planning and my process to clearly understand what it is he needs and what it is she wants in order to be happy. Because that's the key to a good marriage as well. What is it that he needs to be happy? And what is it that she wants? Because a lot of times for women, it may be I need to drive a certain car, I need to have a certain amount of disposable income, that if I wanted to go shop for something I don't need, I got an extra 20, 30, or two, $3,000 to do that. It's just really based on what it is you need. And there has to be this honesty, not only in the relationship, but in the storyline, that I'm addressing these two factors that's
Mm.
going to make the story work and be part of the process that makes sense.
I love that. And how do you like, do you ever have to do any research? And if so, like, how do you do it? We talked earlier about the ex-military guys with their skill set. How do you do the research for those types of stories?
Both my husband and I are ex-military,
Ah,
and
okay.
yeah, and we've had friends that were Navy SEALs, that were Army Rangers as well. So we know the life. Um, for the brides, each of the brides is a different state, you know. So I take what the state is famous for, and that's usually in the title. You know, like Arkansas comes out in April, and Arkansas is famous for down home cooking. So of course, the title of the book is Down Home Cooking.
Mhm.
And then I actually went to Maine, and I talked to people. I walked the streets to understand and hear the lingo, hear the language, hear how syllables rolled off the tongue. I stopped in little local eateries to figure out what it is they eat. And so the book was titled Lobsters, Bisque, and Berries, because that's what Maine is famous for. And then I went west to Oklahoma, um, and Oklahoma is very well known for sunflowers and honey. So that's what the title for Oklahoma is. But part of my research is I actually go to those states and
Mhm.
I walk the land. I feel it. I listen to the people. I understand who they are and how they choose to live. Because
Mhm.
each state has a different feel. Each state, the people are always truly genuine, but they truly love their way of life.
Yeah,
And so I want to make sure I capture that in the story.
I love that. Um, so how long have you been writing romance novels?
I've I've only been writing romances for 10 years, and it was
Only?
absolutely
That's a
only
decent
10
amount of
years.
time.
Huh?
That's a decent amount of time.
It is. At times I feel like I should be further along in my career, after a 10-year process, but sometimes it just takes longer to hit and connect. But when I'm working with new writers or young writers, I always say, what do you want from your author life? What do you want from your author career? Well, I want to write full time. Well, what does that look like? You sitting at home in a room by yourself, being antisocial, making up ways for people to kiss, you know. Um, my author life, I don't see myself being at a Barnes and Noble, sitting behind a table with a line around the building. It's nice. It's nice, but I don't like people that much.
I know, bro. I totally. When you said that, I was like, oh no, that wouldn't work for me. But
Exactly. It would freak me out. I want to do that. I don't want to do that. I go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said absolutely not. No.
And see, for me, that's not what my author life looks like. So I had to redefine what success in my author life would look like and feel like to me, because that would totally just freak me out. There are conferences that I attend that people will walk up and just start randomly talking about a book that I've written. And it may have been something that I wrote when I started out writing. Well, you named a character after me. Awesome! I don't know what that is. And I get her name and I go to my Facebook group and I'm like, okay, I got a $5 Amazon gift card to people, to anyone who could tell me, the first person could tell me what book this character came out of. And they'll pop right back and I'm like, oh my gosh, that book. And yeah, it can be a lot, because there are a lot of people that live in my head.
Well, this is it, right? I mean, you've written so many books. I think it must be hard in some ways to keep track of it. It's not like you've written, you know, there's a series that I read, and I'm sure there've been like 26 or 27 books, and it's like one main character, right? So that's fine. But like if you've written like mini series with different characters and stuff, I can imagine you start to get crowded in there, you know. So
Right. Because I think you talk about like Janet Ivankovich with that series where she's got like 27 books, but it's always Lula and and Ranger and so it's always the same characters, just different scenarios. I've done that with the Blakemore Files. I had the same two characters in every book, but sometimes series can get to the point where they're draining. Because there are so many details that you have to keep up with.
I was going to say, you have to remember everything in order to keep it consistent, right? Like to keep it consistent from one book to the next. It's almost, to me, I almost feel like listen, I've written like 2 novels, and just on my website type of thing, or not. I'm not going to pretend to be a novel writer, but just even I had to go back and reread the first or I could write the second one. And even then, I'm pretty sure there were some continuity errors that my sister pointed out to me almost immediately. I was like, so I don't know how you keep it up with lots of books in a series. Like, I'm pretty impressed with that.
Well, let me make you adjust yourself a little bit there. If you've written 2 novels, then you're a novel writer. Okay.
Thank you.
There are some people who cannot even finish a single novel. You finish 2. So therefore, you are a novelist. Okay. And I have a journal for every series.
Trying
to see if I normally have one close by. Like this is my technician series. Yes, that is a Hogwarts.
Yes. Love it.
But inside of the series, inside of my journal, I have the layout for the first 10.
Okay.
Okay.
So you planned that to be a 10-book series. So I did. I got you covered now.
I've actually planned for it to be more than 10 books, but you didn't see that.
No, that's fine.
Okay. And then I laid out how they're connected. I laid out their traffic signs. Okay, because each one, they're like Mr. Stop, Mr. Yield, Mr. Exit, one way. And they have all of these handles. And when I'm looking at the homes, I know exactly where they live, how they live. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got all of these details in there from where I plotted the chapters. So I've got this reference manual for the entire series. So I know all 10 books, all the characters, all the locations, all the details, height, weight, color, allergies, history. I have one character, he went to college on a cheerleading scholarship, but he's an assassin.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. This is brilliant. So I'm curious then. I know you said you've been doing this for 10 years. How did you build your audience? Because this is something that people will often say to me, or like I'll have conversations whereby, people, they want to be writers. And you talked earlier about people who say, I want to write full time. And you're like, what does that look like?
Right.
And I'm always aware that a part of that has to look like audience building. Like it has to look like having people to read your books. Otherwise, you could write full time, but earn you any money if you
Right.
don't have people to read it. So, how did you set about the process of building your audience, if you don't mind me asking?
I was a kind of a college professor, and I taught contemporary literature. So I have a undergrad. My undergrad minor is in Arthurian legend. I don't know. At the time, I was just being a nerd, and it was just cool to have that as a an English minor, Arthurian legend. But I understand what goes into a story. I understand what goes into literature. So I took the elements of literature and I applied it to romance. And it was
Mm-hmm.
something that people had never read in that way, to
Mm-hmm.
where it had these themes versus the silly girl. Well, I'm mad at you. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So chapter 5, they're fighting. By chapter 5, I've got them married, and they're trying to figure out what we're going to do to build this life together. And so, because it was so different, people were like, well, have you read this? I was laughing all night long at these people, and it's the things that they're laughing at are everyday things that things that you see, that you have experienced, that you really don't think about. For example, I have one character that doesn't talk much, and when he does say something, people are like, "Ooh, stop talking, stop talking," you know. But he points out things that you see all the time that you really don't think about. And he's like, have you noticed that every time you go to a Mexican restaurant, there's a Mexican family in there? Like, didn't we just have tacos yesterday? Because the kids come in and they order tacos, and she's just kind of like, stop talking, you know. So I'm pointing out those things that we see in everyday life, but I'm telling it in a way that's humorous, and
Mm-hmm.
people gravitated toward it. And then I would go to conferences and I would meet the readers, and they're like, oh my gosh, she's actually funny in person. And they're like, I don't mean to be, I'm just being Olivia, because there's a difference between Olivia and my government name. But this is who they're coming to meet. So I'm making sure that Olivia is who they've come to meet.
Yeah. And I definitely get that. What's been your
Mhm.
proudest moment throughout your career?
Waking up one day and realizing I'm a novelist. It wasn't any award. It wasn't any reader coming up and telling me that, okay, I read the story and it really changed things for me. It was when I woke up and I realized that I had spent 3 years building a business that actually was sustaining me, and it was doing something that I loved and that I enjoyed, and that I'm okay, and I'm good. I'm good, you know.
Ah, I absolutely love that. That's really good. And what might you do differently next time? Not next time. You may not have this career again, but if you had to start again, what might you do differently? Looking back, what do you think you might do differently?
I would make sure I understood the stories that I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
You know, like I said, I started out writing erotica, and I just started out writing interracial because I was thinking back to the boyfriend I had in college. What if things had been different? Uh, what would our life had looked like? And I kind of started trying to rewrite that story. Um, but then as I aged, I let the stories age with me. I let the characters age with me, and I wanted to reach more mature readers. Um, Women who were professionals, or women who wanted to read about joy
Mm.
in a romance versus it having to be all of this struggle love. We know struggle love. We've seen struggle love. We probably have lived through struggle love. But do I want to read it? On occasion, it's okay. But if I want to read something, I want to have this experience, this adventure. So if I had to do it all over again, I would make sure I knew what it was I wanted to write.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. And what advice might you give? Because I know obviously you do work with young writers. So, what type of advice would you give a young creative or a young writer, or what is advice that you feel like you most often give out when you're working with your younger writers?
Know your number. Know your number.
Hmm.
Okay. What number do you need to leave your full time job to do what you love to do full time? What is that number?
Hmm.
What do you have to give up in order to hit that number comfortably without too many sacrifices? Because a lot of people want to be a full time writer, but is that a six-figure writer? Do you want five figures? Do you want to be able to be a millionaire with that? And if so, what are you going to have to give up in order to get that? Because everything has a sacrifice to it. I know a lot of authors who have hit seven figures and their family life have fallen apart. You know, because you can spend a lot of time in this room making up ways for people to fall in love when the person who actually loves you in the other room is completely being ignored.
Mm.
You can have it all, just not all at the same time. So you have to figure out where the balance is, you know. Because once I hit the point to where people are calling to book me to say, well, can you do this? Can you come teach on this cruise? Let me check with my assistant. And I know him, that's his public name, him. He's gotten better at actually assisting me when we travel, but I can't book anything unless my husband's schedule
Allows it.
is for him to come along with me.
Mm.
There are some things that I'll do on my own, but if he gave me the freedom 10 years ago to build this, he has to be able to reap the rewards as well.
Yeah.
Okay? So, was it last year, year before last? I got booked on the Tom Joyner cruise to come teach. Okay. So I brought him along as, to assist me. He got me set up. He did what he needed to do. And there he is running around the ship with the Yin Yang twins, having a good time. And he's able to enjoy the things that we had to sacrifice for me to build this writing career that I wanted. And I
Mm.
wanted to make sure that while I'm doing this life that I've always wanted, that nobody in my family is being left by the wayside.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That's really, yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I love that. So tell our audience if I have any aspiring romance novel writing people in the audience where they can find you, either to read your books or to get some of that inspiration that you seem to be so good at giving out.
Well, I'm all over social media. You can find me, you can start on my website. I always tell people start on my website at ogaines.com. OGAINES.com. You'll also find me there on Facebook at ogaines.com. You can find me on Instagram at Olivia Writes as well. You know.
Nice, nice. I'll put all the
But
links in the show notes as well.
okay.
Uh, so yeah, I'm so glad you were able to join me. I really appreciate everything you had to share.
Awesome.
I actually feel quite pumped up now. So
Go right, girl. Go right.
yeah, I definitely feel quite pumped up. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's been good to chat. I look forward to reading some of
Likewise.
these novels as well, though. So I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole and
I'm
see what.
warning you. I'm warning you. The rabbit hole is deep because once you start reading, you be like, "Oh my gosh, I want to read more." I do want to tell budding novelists, especially if you're looking at writing romance. Do you remember the one that got away? You
Hmm.
remember him? Rewrite the story with you and he together.
Hmm.
All the problems that you face, tackle those in chapter two. Chapter 3, figure out which ones are really important and which ones are going to linger throughout the whole story. But throughout the story, make sure that the characters are putting love above all of those problems and all of those issues. So that at the end of the night, when they're lying down next to each other, it's about the intimacy versus just that connection. And once you're able to do that, you're going to have a really great story.
I love that. I love that. That's a really great place to start, and I wholeheartedly agree. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thanks for letting us know where to find you, and I look forward to catching up with you through the pages.
All right.
All right. So
thank you for having me.
No problem. And everyone, see you next week. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.